Hello, and welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is author Maria Dong. We're going to be talking to her about herself and her new book, Aviary. Maria, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm very glad you're here as well. And before we get into all about Maria, as folks who are familiar with the show like to think about, we talk about things we may have read or watched lately. Did we like them? Did we hate them? Do we have no opinion about them whatsoever? Part them? Yeah, I watched it. I'll go first just to give Maria a little time to collect her thoughts. So, two films that I watched over the past couple of days. The first one, I'd heard a lot of good things about it, and it was a nominee for Best Picture this year. It is a Train Dreams, and I'm already a fan of Westerns, and this kind of is a Western, but it's more just about I don't know, the slow development of the Western part of the country around like the late 19th century and then into the first half of the 20th century. And I loved it. It was just beautiful to look at. It was a great story, and it's very different from what I was expecting. And I just really enjoyed it. It's only like an hour, 45 minutes long, but it goes by very quickly and it definitely tugs at the heartstrings in a couple of moments. So, highly recommend that. It's still on Netflix. And total opposite of the spectrum on that one. If you took The Hangover and set it in China with an all-female cast, well, or all-female leads, you would have the film Joyride, which was incredibly silly. It's that kind of humor. It's very uh, I don't know, a lot of base humor, I guess is the best way to put it. It's very silly, but I enjoyed it a lot. I didn't really laugh that much, but I thought, oh, haha, that's funny. Kind of that sort of thing. But, if it's not really your thing, you're probably not going to like it. But if you enjoy, The Hangover and Seth Rogen type comedies, you're going to love it because I think he was an executive producer on it. So that's it for me. So Maria, what about you? And I know you have a very small child, so it's not, don't be embarrassed if like Bluey is the only thing you've been watching lately.
Actually, she's a big Elmo stan, so it would be a lot of Elmo.
Okay.
I have actually very recently started to be able to have enough free time to read and or watch things, so that's very exciting for me. I'm actually reading Ellie Bowie's new book, Small Bites, which comes out in I think October,
Mm.
and it's kind of like so far it's a very creepy kind of. I get the feeling there's going to be body horror coming, but like it's kind of like being teased around the margins, and I'm like, there's like a talking gigantic spider in this lady's kitchen,
Oh,
and they're just
oh
like
my.
talking and they're communing. Yeah, so that's very cool. I just finished Breaking Day by Oyabanji, which is a science fiction novel about like a generation ship, which it's pretty good. It's not as good as Esperance, which is his book that just came out, which is kind of in this. It's sort of similar because they're both like techno thrillers, but that one's
Hmm.
more set in like our a version of our modern world. As far as watching, I have been watching, what is it called? It's called like High Potential Individual, I think, or High Potential. So it was a French show and then it got remade for the United States. And it's definitely like a guilty pleasure. It's like kind of by the numbersy a little bit, but it's very fun. And there's a lot of like fun trivia in it. And I love like random weird facts. So, the main character is like solving a murder based on like spray paint drippings, and I'm like, I
Oh,
am
okay.
so here for that information, right? And this is kind of embarrassing, but I'm also catching up on things that I didn't really watch television for like 10, 15 years, so I'm catching up on a lot of stuff from like the like early 2000s. I just watched Once Upon a Time for the first time,
Okay.
which is like an old show, but I enjoyed that. It was nice, when you've put the kid to bed and you're like laying there trying to recover. It's like a nice little recovery show. So that's
Hmm.
kind of what I've been reading and watching.
Okay. That's great. Well, don't, if everybody, like some show is if somebody's watching it for the first time. It doesn't matter how old or how recent it is, that there's always going to be somebody who hasn't seen it
Yeah.
before. Because I was thinking about this earlier that I saw this, an article that someone was like, couldn't believe someone had never seen, this movie, and they'd be like, well, it's just one of those things. I'm not as rabid a fan as you are, so don't cut me some slack, that type of thing. That's fine. I mean, if
Yeah,
you're
and
but
I
you're
also have
enjoying
been
it, that's the
really
important part.
Yeah, I also think that I've really been enjoying pulling fiction in movies from like the 80s, for example, or the 70s, because the genre conventions are different
Hmm.
and the things that like artists are allowed to do might be different based on like how, corporate structures work at publishers and studios and stuff. So sometimes it can feel really fresh and original just because it's something that isn't done very much anymore, for example. Sorry, I'm like tangenting already. I'll get
No,
back on target.
it's quite
But
okay.
yeah, no. So as you were saying, yeah.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. So what I will do is I will read the about the author. Then we'll talk a little bit, Maria, about your what I like to call it your origin story. So, Korean American author Maria Dong writes genre-bending suspense and is the author of Liar, Dreamer, Thief, Psychopomp, and Aviary. Like this one. Her short fiction and essays have been published in dozens of magazines and anthologies, including The Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, Lightspeed, Augur, Nightmare, Choreo, Fantasy, Apex, and Apparition, and her story In the Beginning of Me, I Was a Bird, was a finalist for the Theodore Sturgeon Memorial Award. Maria lives with her partner in Southwest Michigan in a centenarian saltbox house that is almost certainly haunted, watching K-dramas and drinking Bell's beer. All right, so Maria, let's talk a little bit about you. What is your backstory? Were you always a writer? Were you a voracious reader as a child? Is writing something you've always been, or something you came into a little bit later in life?
Yeah, okay. So I definitely was always a reader. I can say
Okay.
that for sure. I think it would be annoying for my mom actually because she would take me to the library once a week and we would have like two or three like full shopping bags of books and she had to carry those. So I feel bad
Wow.
for her because that was probably pretty heavy. Yeah. So I've always been an extremely voracious reader. I think that like writing was something I just kind of did on and off. I don't think I took it totally seriously in terms of like trying to get published until pretty recently. By recently, I mean like 2016, 2017. I went to graduate school for occupational therapy, and after you finish a healthcare degree like that, you have to take your licensing exam, and I did not want to study for it. So in the true ADHD fashion, I was procrastinating a thing with another thing, which is there was this contest called Pitch Wars, which it ran until about I think 3 years ago. It finally ended after like 10 years of running. And the premise of the contest is like you send in a manuscript, and if your manuscript gets chosen, they match you with a mentor in the program. I think they chose about like 3% of manuscripts. So it was a pretty select number. And that mentor would help you edit your manuscript. And then there was an agent showcase at the end where you could pitch your manuscript to a bunch of agents who had already agreed to kind of come to the showcase. And they would help you with like your prep materials as well, like your mentor would, right? So like I decide that instead of studying for my boards, I'm gonna real quick, just real quick, whip out this novel I really wanted to do, which was like this. And I remember saying to myself, this is the last time I'm gonna do this because I had tried before to kind of be serious about writing, and then of course it doesn't really go anywhere. And then, you have to like make money and have a job. And I was like, okay, I have my big girl job lined up, which is like my fourth career. I'm done with graduate school. I got to get my license. I got to put my head down, pay off these student loans, which I will never pay off. Like, let's be honest, it's not looking great. But I was like, so what I'm going to do is this is my last chance. I'm going to write this one last book. I'm going to send it in this contest. I know it's not going to get in, but I feel like I'll be able to let go, right? And then it gets into the contest. And I got,
Hmm.
mentored by Victoria Lee and Arv Kwong, who are two amazing writers. And it went to the agent showcase. And I did get an agent through that showcase process. And that book was like a Joseon Dynasty Korean fantasy with like a zombie virus, essentially. And then like right after we went out on submission, so think about this. The showcase was in the very beginning of 2019. So we were on submission for a little while once we finished up our edits and everything, and
Hmm.
then COVID happened. And as
Right.
soon as COVID happened, every publisher under the sun was like, books with diseases, absolutely not, right? Like they all kind of like shrunk down their commercial list.
Hmm.
And that was a bummer. There were a lot of times too where when people rejected that book, one of the rejections I would get from editors a lot is like, in a real pandemic, people wouldn't be this selfish, because like the people in my book were sometimes not very good people. I don't write very good people generally.
Hmm.
And it was like horrible to have it die this like slow death on submit. We got so close so many times. We had so many calls with publishers that were like super interested, but then like the money people wouldn't quite let it go across the line, basically. Um, so it dies this like terrible death on submission. And, 6 months to a year later, we have more information about how people would act during a large scale virus event. And it turns out a lot of people are very selfish, and I felt very
Right.
vindicated. But at that point, like I already had another book written, and so we went on submission with that, and that book also died on submission, so that was super fun. And that was a science fiction novel, and the villain in the original version was Elon Musk, and I felt like that was too on
Oh,
the nose. And this was before Elon Musk became like,
a
I mean, he was
supervillain.
evil before, yeah, like a super villain, right? And I was like, oh, great, I gotta stop doing this. Oh, am I back? Did it come back?
No,
Sorry,
you're still there.
Okay, great. Sometimes it cuts out, so if I disappear, let me know and I'll just slap it again and it'll come back.
Okay.
It's not my microphone. It's my husband's incredibly expensive microphone, which for some reason I felt like I needed for this, and now I regret this choice. So, yeah, so that book dies on submission, which isn't super fun. And yeah, and then I wrote another book and we didn't take it on its submission because at the time, fantasy was really contracting down as a market and it was a
Hmm.
really tough sell as a market. And my agent said, before we go out with this book, do you have any ideas for books that wouldn't be fantasy? And I was like, well, I do have this one idea. And she was like, I know you. So when you say you have an idea, you've already written the book. And I was like, that's true. I did. And so I gave it to her and she was like, okay. And I thought we were going to do what we do with every book I write, which is like 6 rounds of revision that span months and are very painful. And so then I emailed her a little bit later and I was like, hey, have you read this? And she was like, yeah, so we talked about this. It's on submission. So obviously I wasn't paying attention because I thought it was going to get like all of these edits. And she was like, it's ready to go. And like within 2 weeks, we got preempted by Grand Central. And that's what became my debut. So in some ways, if you just take the very end of it, it sounds so fast. It's like, we went on submission 2 weeks later, we had a sale, and it's like, yes, but no. You know what I mean?
But
Yeah.
it took two, I don't know, foiled attempts to get there. So third time really was the charm this time.
I think I did when I started TikTok, which I'm not really on TikTok, but like I tried. I gave it a college try, as we used to say, us olds. And um I think I calculated out in a video, and it's like over 1 million words of writing that I attempted to have published. Like I took seriously, wrote multiple books, attempted to have published before I actually had a book cross that editor yes checkmark threshold and get published. So I'm getting really close to the camera again. I have wheels in this chair and it's just kind of like scooting forward. Okay, I'm
Oh,
back.
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
That's okay. Okay, which book was that finally was able
Liar,
to go
Dreamer,
out?
Thief.
I'm sorry?
Liar, Dreamer, Thief.
Okay.
It's called yeah. I didn't
Okay.
pick the title. In fact, there were a lot of arguments about the title, but you don't get to pick your title. So
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, so then that led to Psychopomp, which is your second book.
that was actually the one of the books that died on submission,
Oh,
and
which was that? Was that the
the
pandemic book
science
or the
fiction,
Elon
the
Musk book?
Elon Musk well, yeah, but there's no like Elon Musk villain in it anymore.
Oh.
Yeah, but um, I had a friend who was actually an acquiring editor at a very, very small publishing house. And the thing about that book is like I was kind of reaching a point in my writing where I was turning away from like that kind of fiction that I do in that book.
Hmm.
And so I kind of knew that like after a certain point I wasn't going to want to go back to it, but I also like worked really hard on it and had this whole book that like my agent took out and everything. And so I asked my agent, like, hey, would you be opposed to me just seeing if my friend would want this at this publishing house? And she said, yeah, sure, of course, it's your book. Do what you want, which I always like have to ask for permission for things that like I obviously don't need permission for. So I asked her and she said, well, I have to read it and we have to all kind of vote as a house and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, yeah, of course, of course. And she read it and she was like, oh, I love this. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead. So it's actually like a micro press, which was a very different experience than my first book, which was at Hachette, which is a big five or is it big four now? I don't know. They keep eating
Hmm.
each other. And yeah. So, and then this third book is actually at Severn House, which is a division of Canongate. And so it's kind of like in the middle. Like it's not a big five house, but it's also not like a tiny micro press. There's like an actual staff with like, publicists and stuff. So it's like kind of in the middle, which was a really nice experience. Sorry, I don't even know what the question was anymore.
That's
So,
okay. That's okay. Okay, so you are talking about your new book, Aviary. What I like to ask the guest to do is for screenwriting, it's the elevator pitch. That here's my story in like 2 sentences. But for authors, it tends to be more like the cocktail party pitch. And you meet someone and says, "Oh, Maria, tell me about your new book, Aviary. What is it about?" And you can say,
okay. There is a woman who is an undocumented person in South Korea, and she has a sister who went to the United States for this artist program that the woman, her name is Heejin, was very against because she was like, we're not even documented. Are you crazy? So she hears a knock at her door and she opens it, and there is a body, and it happens to be her sister's body. And so she checks her sister's body and she discovers a passport and a ticket to the United States. And so now she's at this crossroads where it's like, do I take my sister's identity and go to America where something bad happened that perhaps, might happen to me is kind of like the setup.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to say we'll get into this a little bit. It covers several genres, but I think the biggest question I had was like, what was the inspiration for the story? Did it just kind of come to you, or was this something that was long in development, like in the back of your mind?
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing. So the original seed for this story, like the very earliest flash of inspiration, was an episode of 90 Day Fiancé. I am like super addicted to that show. I think that show is like actually a show about capitalism and like people being crushed under capitalism, right? There's all of these people who are in these like really desperate financial straits. And then they meet this like online love who they don't
Hmm.
know very well, maybe have not even seen in person. And they think that if they either get this person here, they can, they'll be in love and that person won't care about all the things they lied about. Or, they'll go over there where that person is and over in Europe or India or wherever, things will be so much better because for some reason, all of the things that are bad here won't be bad there. And that's obviously not true. And so, like,
Hmm.
over and over, you see this like very Shakespearean terrible tragedy play out where, most of the time people are very not happy with their choices. Sometimes it works out, but and
Okay.
I and I think I also really love this show because my parents do come from two different countries too. So like there's some things the show does really accurately and there's some things I'm like, this is fake. But anyway, there was an episode of this show where they interview this man's ex-wife. So the man's probably like 35, 40. He has a wife who's like the same age. He has like a midlife crisis. They get divorced. He finds this like young wife. She's like 20, 25 maybe in like Brazil, I think, or maybe it was Colombia. It was a long time ago. It was like many years ago. And so the ex-wife is like really worried because he's bringing this person here and they have two kids and the kids see both parents every single day and so she's like how is this going to work like kind of like really nervous and upset, right? And so then the new wife comes and almost immediately these two women realize that their mutual husband slash ex-husband is kind of like a chump, right? He's really immature and he doesn't do a good job of anything. And so the two women immediately band up together and start like tackling the housework and getting the kids in order and everything. And they kind of become like weird friends, right? And obviously that's not what happens in this book at all, but
Right,
I just,
right.
that initial like
Do
just
the
like
do the two women live in the same house?
no, but I think they're like next door neighbor. I mean, like
Okay.
it's been like 5 years since I saw this
Okay.
because this book was on. I sent this book to my editor at Grand Central before my debut even came out. My debut came out in January of 23. So this book's gonna have a long road to like,
Hmm.
publication. So, and it took me a long time to write it. It took like for me, it took me a long time. Usually I
Okay.
can crank out a book in like 6 months, maybe a year. This book took me like 2.5 years. Like I was
Wow.
like for year and it was weird because like for years everything I read everything I saw would kind of like fit into this book somehow which some people don't like because they're like there are too many things happening in this book and this book is too many things at the same time and if that's how you feel I totally respect and understand that this is just like how it happened for me so like I read Devil in the White City and for obvious reasons if you've read that book and
Sure,
the H.
sure.
H. Holmes situation you kind of get some of the parallels there. um the Atlanta spa shootings happened, which was really, really sad. For people that don't remember, this man killed several women in Atlanta that were working in a spa, and a lot of them were from Asia, and most of them, yeah. And there was one that she was Korean, and she had like a name pattern that was very similar to my mom's name, and like just like in English, there's like kind of generational styles to names. So like
Hmm.
if you have that name pattern, like you were kind of born in this certain time period in this certain class. And so it was like, I don't know, like it was really, really hard for me, like that event. And so that kind of wound its way up in here too, with like feminine rage and all of that. So I don't know. And yeah, and exoticism and Orientalism and all of these things that I think about all the time. And it had such a long genesis. So that was also, I remember like submitting this book and, the second Trump presidency had not happened. Epstein had happened and then kind of like disappeared, right?
Right.
Like it's like almost like Biden became president. Everyone was like, okay, all of the bad things that happened, we're just going to forget that those happened. We're cool. And I just felt so angry about that, right?
Hmm.
Like, and we didn't even know what we know now, but I was still so mad about it. And so that was like another thing that kind of rolled itself into this book. And yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Oh no, I was so as you were describing it, so the book kind of falls under several genres at the same time. Is it you said a thriller, horror,
Yeah.
almost like some elements of the supernatural, and definitely female empowerment. And you also have there's some queer literature influences there. So was that your intent from the outset, or was it kind of like it took you time to put all the pieces together?
Yeah, so I consider myself in my heart of hearts to be a speculative fiction writer, like a fantasy writer. And fantasy as like genres in publishing go is an extremely small niche tight genre, right? There's only like five imprints really, like major imprints that take fantasy. There's like one basically at each of the big houses, and then they're like one or two kind of like medium size independents, right? Versus like if you write a thriller or a mystery or something that's like grounded in a contemporary space, there are dozens and dozens and dozens
Hmm.
of imprints. So I consider myself to be kind of a fantasy writer, and like the trick for me is grounding that well enough that it can sell somewhere that isn't necessarily like a fantasy place. This book, I think originally in the version that I sent it to my first editor, was probably too grounded. It didn't go far enough into the horror space. Like when I
Hmm.
was writing it, I kept kind of like feeling that I was going there and like kind of pulling myself back, like, oh, but this got to go to Grand Central. It's a very commercial place. It's got to sit next to Liar, Dreamer, Thief on the shelf. Like, can't do that. And so, like, just pulling it back and pulling it back and pulling it back. I remember having the idea about the women and their bodies transforming and being like, nope, that doesn't work. It's too commercial. It's not commercial enough. I'm sorry. And then when they turned that down and it went out on submission, I had this really great conversation with an editor who was trying to buy the book. And then ultimately, like, some of the number counters at the house said no. Um, but she said, would you be interested in kind of taking it further into a horror space? And I was so grateful for that conversation because like I was like, yes, I would love to. And so like immediately, like just, I felt like all my little wheels spinning. So I don't think it was hard in the sense that like if I had come out of the gate with it, I think it would have been easy. It was very hard to try to stick close to like non-weird, non-surreal commercial mystery space. And so like eventually I'm not good at that and I just gave up on it
So,
eventually.
so writing, so really like embracing the horror was almost liberating for you. Like, oh,
Oh my
yeah, I
God, it
can,
felt
I
so
can
good.
really get into this.
I was like, yes, yes, turn them into birds. Yes, fluid spraying everywhere. Yes, let's stab people in the eye. Woo! I was very excited for it.
Okay, I like the woo. That's a great emphasis.
Yeah.
What I thought was really interesting, again, the book is Aviary by Maria Dong. That a lot of the chapters, maybe I don't know, 75% are okay. The whole thing is told in first person, but there are two narrators,
Yeah.
and 75% or so, that's my estimate, is Heejin, the main character. But you also have a second narrator who's almost, I guess, in some ways like a minor supporting character. And I don't
Yeah.
want to, I try not to do spoilers, but I think it's safe to say that this character only comes into it like after the Heejin comes to America and gets into this location. And she's involved in the story, but she's not a pivotal part of the story. Like she plays a certain role, but
Yeah.
it's not like they're the two butting heads, so to speak. But I was very curious why you decided. I mean, first, like, why did you want to tell the whole thing in first person? And the second question is why this approach, like, three quarters Heejin and the 25% this other character.
Yeah. Okay. So first person, I think me personally, I tend to do a lot of when I'm writing in the thriller space in first person because I tend to write books that are extremely claustrophobic, where
Hmm.
the narrators are pretty unreliable, and I want to be extremely tight to their point of view. And so, first person really feels claustrophobic a lot of the time. Like it just maps really beautifully onto that. And it's really funny. I just sold this. We just like last week sold a book to Severed House, the publisher of this book, and it's like in a very distant, fancy third. So I really think point of view is this tool that writers. I think people make like a moral judgment almost like I've met a lot of writers that are like, oh, first person so trashy or oh, third person so stodgy, and it's like you are not using the tool in your toolbox to the effect that you could be using it, right? I've written stories in second person and it makes a completely different feeling. Like I think point of view is such a great tool in your toolbox as a writer. So first person, it feels very immediate. It feels very close. If you're writing something that you want to kind of like have a lot of space in the details almost and let people kind of fill that in for themselves, like first is often like a really nice point of view. And it also doesn't allow for a lot of authorial interposition. So with third, it's almost like you have a triangle. You have the character and their thoughts, and then you have the reader, and you also have the author, and you can really feel the author more, I feel like, in third person. And sometimes that works really really well. Like, I don't know, like a distant quasi-Victorian steampunk queer fantasy heist novel will be coming out in March of 2027, perhaps. But for this book, I wanted something really tight, right? And
Hmm.
also, the narrator feels very unreliable after a certain point. You start out feeling very reliable because you're like right in her point of view, but then as you get information and things start to not line up, particularly between the two points of view, things don't line up, and then you start going like, okay, well, who's lying? Is someone lying? Like something's happening here. Time, I play with time a lot too. People get really mad. I think this is so funny. Like when it comes to suspension of disbelief, people are totally okay with all of like the weirdest aspects, and then they're like, "Wait, there's 4 days in this point of view, and there's like 5 weeks. That does not match." And it's like, okay, well, I get to play with time too sometimes, but if you feel that way, that's totally fine. Like I'm not mad at all. I've read at this point like hundreds, if not thousands, of people's opinion of my work, and it no longer most of the time it listens to nothing. But as to why Callie's point of view, I did so much research when I was in that long gestating period about the nature of evil and how it's different in fiction as represented in TV and novels versus like in real life, what evil actually looks like, right? Evil and then also heroes too, because like in fiction stories, we really like it to have like one hero who takes a giant heroic action and that saves the country or something. But that's not how countries get saved in real life, right? And so I was thinking a lot about how fiction differs from real life, and I read a lot by God, I can't ever pronounce it. It's like Hannah Ertrich. I'll send it to you. You can put it in the notes or whatever. But she writes a lot about evil and fascism and totalitarianism, and I read a lot about how monsters are represented in folklore. I have a friend who's actually a professor of like monster studies and literature, who was really nice and gave me lots of things to read that were very helpful because I can't research very well compared to him. And I wanted the villain in this book to feel like villains are in real life. Our villains in real life are not super strong, super human, super amazing, like scary people. Most of the time, they are very average, often dudes, who have kind of access to some power and they have a little flexible morality, and then nobody shuts them down when they start doing bad things. So, in Callie's point of view, you can see the very beginning of where the villain starts his like villainous journey, essentially, right? Like the first small evils that he did and how no one stopped those evils and then how those evils started to grow over time. And so I felt like, maybe she's not as important to Hedon's like immediate plot, but in terms of like kind of for the reader to be able to understand what's really happening in this house, she was important to me. And she's very divisive. Some people really love her, some people really hate her. And I think also the people that hate her for two reasons. Some just think she's unnecessary and they don't like her point of view, and that's totally fair. I think a lot of people hate her though because she's a collaborator, and we
Hmm.
like to separate our fiction very neatly into villains and heroes, right? We don't like collaborators. I think maybe it reminds us that we are also collaborators, right? Like a
Mm.
lot of bad things are happening around us and we don't really have that much choice in it. So we just kind of, get along, go along to get along. Um, but like as a nation, we hate, or as a people, we hate collaborators. I think all people hate collaborators more than they even hate villains, right? You can have a really mean, morally decrepit villain. People are like, he's terrible. They're like, oh, it's so awesome. I love it. But you have like a kind of gray area collaborator, and people hate that. They hate it so much. So I think that's also part of her point of view. Sorry, I've
Sure,
lost the
sure. No,
question.
no, I totally get that. I also want to ask, so you started it and then you took a bit of a break and you got back to it. When you started, I guess the whole time while you were working on it, was there a lot of extensive outlining or was just kind of like, I think this should happen, or I'm going to see where the characters take me?
Yeah,
I only ask because there are a lot, almost through the entire book, there are a lot of like surprises and twists and unexpected turns. And
yeah.
some of those are kind of like, okay, I can't imagine she just said, I'm going to have this happen all of a sudden and take it from there. Because a lot of them seem like there's some really good setting up for eventual payoffs. And I was wondering if that's the approach that you were taking, or if it was just kind of more like, okay, what's something that could happen here? Like, oh, I'll try this.
I don't think either approach.
Oh, okay.
So usually when I do a first draft, I really try not to out like so I because I've done so many books like I think this was like the 25th book that I had written end to end, right? And
Wow.
so I've had chances to kind of go between different processes, right? I started out completely pantsing, and then I was like, this is terrible. There's so much fixing on the other side. So then I was like, I'm going to plot. And as it turns out, when I plot, two things happen. One is I get bored. I have actually plotted out entire books that I was like, oh, I know what happens now. I don't need to do this anymore. And just like walked away and never picked that manuscript up again. So that is bad. And then also, a lot of times the characters start doing stuff that's not in my outline, and then I'm at war with myself trying to keep them like in the outline, and they're like
Your characters are
absolutely
getting away from you?
they do. They really, yeah. I think that like so usually first draft I'm gonna plot it and then I'm looking, but I'm kind of like wayfinding. Like I'm looking for like where are my big beats and like what are my big themes, and I might that first God, it's horrible because it's so inefficient, but like I'll probably keep 5 to 10% of that first draft, right?
Hmm.
Everything else has to go into the wood chipper, and then I'll sit down and plot. Now I'm like, okay, I have and it's that moment where I'm like, I know what this book is about. Happens at a different time with every manuscript. With Liar Dreamer Thief, I wrote 60,000 words, and I was trying to write this really like noir, like
Hmm.
cool mystery. It was my first time writing a mystery. I read all these books about writing a mystery, and I was like, I'm gonna write the most mystery to ever, hard boiled. And then I like kind of like started noodling around one day. I probably wasn't paying attention, and I wrote this scene where like the main character is in like a dumpster, and it's like really like madcap and zany, and I was like, oh no, like I think the whole book's
So
kind of
when
supposed
did
to.
how did I go from noir to wacky hijinks?
But it was like so much better. And I was like, oh no, I think this whole book probably. And I also wrote this scene where there's like this thing called the kitchen door world, what's like kind of surreal fan. It's like very almost like Narnia kind of.
Hmm.
And that also was like, it was good. Like you can tell the parts the book is supposed to be because those are the parts that are really good. And you're like, oh my God. So then I had to go back and like redo the whole book around those two pieces. So this book, sorry, go ahead.
I was asking that that is a question I did have that were there times when you were writing and then you just maybe came up with something totally new or different that you kind of had to go back and like, okay, here's where I took a different direction and you had to make the appropriate changes, or do you just think, you know what, I'm just gonna jettison everything I had already and just like follow this one, or like, oh no, I have to fix this to keep it back on track.
Yeah, I try not to go back until I do the next draft
Hmm.
because otherwise I would just be rewriting the first like third over and over and over endlessly. Usually what happens is like I said, some moment will happen. I think that one of the key like okay, this is such really funny because a lot of straight people that read the book find this scene kind of boring, which is where the girls are having dinner and Heejin's watching Ksenia eat. And a lot of queer people find that scene like riveting. And I think the difference is that, if you read a lot of queer literature, there's a lot of like metaphor around eating and sexual desire and things like that. So they're getting like a level out of it, maybe that like
Hmm.
some of the straight people that have not read that are kind of getting. But I wrote that scene, I was like, oh, these two girls are going to be like, and I think I wrote it like I had gone back, written like way past it. And then I was like editing back in the beginning to like remember something, and I get distracted, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna fix this scene up, and then it kind of like went in, and I was like, I have to go back and like start over. Yeah. So
No, I totally get that. I also wanted to ask that. So more than a few times, I had the question of now, is this really happening, or is this in the character's head? Now, was this part of an effort on your part to, I guess, keep the reader constantly guessing, or like, okay, I'm going to throw them this great curveball that they're not expecting right now? Okay,
yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I had like a really nice pat answer. The
sure.
truth is that I think of the question, what is really happening? Like, I have very like I talked I'm when I was younger, I was on these psychiatric medications and I actually had like a break with reality for a short period of time. And after that, kind of came this realization that like at any point, the reality that I am convinced I am in could be false, right? And like it really changes the way you understand the world completely. And then I think also just like as a woman and a woman of color, like I'm constantly told my reality is not true, right? Um, Car Carmen Maria Machado has a great story about this, where this little girl is with her dad at the store and she sees like human toes in the produce and she says, "Oh, I see toes." And her dad's like, "No, those are potatoes," And she's like, no, I really see toes. He's like, no, you don't. And then she's not sure anymore if she sees toes or not. Like that's a lot of, I feel like my experience. Like, like you'll be at the gynecologist, and you'll be like, this really hurts. And they'll be like, this procedure is not painful. It's just mildly uncommon experience in the world. So I have a very loose grip with reality. And I think that's actually one of the themes of the book, right? There's like a whole scene where Tijin's mom is teaching her how to reframe your own reality. Like she's teaching her that you can make yourself believe this table is hot to the point where it will burn you.
Hmm.
And the two sisters are arguing about it, and but only one of them is able to really fully like commit to that belief. And then afterwards, she sees this like redness, and she thinks she's been burned. And so like the question is like, did she? Is it the lacquer, whatever? But so I think this concept of like what is real, right? I can't stop playing with it. It's bad. All of my novels are just like hallucinations. I'm really working on that. I'm trying to write something more realistic, but like I just go into fever dreams so easily. So yeah, I think it's a combination of instinctual and deliberate, and part of it's just my own shaky relationship with reality. Part of it is like what trauma does to your brain generally. Like, both of these main characters are incredibly traumatized people, and there are a lot of coping mechanisms that come with that, like depersonalization, where you kind of like, work your way out of your body, or like being able to kind of put really clear blinkers around different kinds of thought. Blinkers is not the word I'm looking, blinkers around different kinds of thoughts. Like these patterns are also part of what happens in those situations. So it's all kind of like bundled together. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's perfectly okay. I also want to ask that there are a lot of descriptions about the location and the setting of the story, which almost becomes a character unto itself. The building that they're in. Uh, was it important for you to really include all of those details to kind of like not just help set the mood and the setting of the story, but also just to kind of like really flesh it out for the reader, like what kind of world that this story is taking place in? And oh, maybe the wire became disconnected. Let's see. All right. I think we lost her for a second. Let's see if we can get her back.
Love the Midwestern.
Oh, there we Okay, sorry, you cut out for a little bit.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay, there you are.
I think there's just like a lag. Is
Hmm.
it?
Okay.
Can you
Interesting,
not hear me?
but I can hear you now. And the picture is working too.
Oh, okay. So in answer to your question,
Yes.
I'm obsessed with the Midwestern Gothic aesthetic, right? I think
Oh, okay,
that the
breaking.
Midwest,
Might want to jiggle that wire. This is breaking up a little bit.
if you've ever been to some of like the decaying steel towns of the Midwest, have much in common with like, let me just,
Hmm. We're doing so well.
okay.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can.
I've just switched microphones. It's probably not going to be as good quality, but hopefully it'll
No,
like work.
sounds okay now.
If that's okay.
That's fine.
Okay. So so I'm a Midwestern Gothic. I'm obsessed with it. Okay, I don't need this in my face anymore. Um I went to grad school in Pittsburgh, and the first time I went to one of the steel towns and got to see like an exhibit about like the slag and like how grandiose everything was, I was just like, oh, this is going to be my obsession like forever, right? Like and you see it constantly. Like uh, my first book has all of these bridges in it. I was
Hmm.
going to put bridges all over this book, and I was like, that's too many bridges. Like, it's too many bridges. So there's only one bridge in this book, but there are a lot of trains. Yeah. So I think part of it comes from like uh, my obsession with the Midwestern goth, but also like it's a villain of all of my, and yeah.
Okay, still having a little issue with the sound, kind of like cutting in and out
Can
occasionally.
you can you not hear?
Yeah, I can hear you, but every like it's you sound fine, and then all of a sudden it cuts out or like it gets distorted. It's very strange. It's like it just suddenly started happening. That's okay. I only have a
Oh
couple more
no.
questions. That's okay. We're doing fine. We're doing fine. So just like one, the last one wanted to ask you about. So Heejin is Korean. And so the story starts in Korea and she works her way to America. But there are a lot of mentions about Korean culture and Korean folklore and a lot of aspects of Korean culture that are woven into the story that they're not just dropped in for the sake of being dropped in. They're put in as a sort of they're a relevant point to what she's experiencing or something that she's thinking about. And I just thought that was really fascinating. Was it really important to you to really like highlight or put a spotlight on these certain aspects of her native culture that she has brought with her, and it's like almost like she's using that to help her adapt to this new situation that she's in.
Mhm. My mom is from Korea, so and I lived there as a baby, and then I lived there again as an adult. Um, and I think that I have been thinking a lot, particularly about Korean history and Korean folk tales, um, two separately. Korean history specifically because, like, I think that many diaspora Koreans, so people who, have Korean descent but live in different countries, um, have come to that place because of these global and often tragic events. Like, I talk about it in the book a little bit, like the Japanese occupation and how many Koreans were like kind of moved against their will to various countries. Even like I think everyone know, well, not everyone, but I think a lot of people know someone who was like adopted from Korea in the 80s. And now there are a lot of reports that are kind of emerging about how some of these adoptions are probably quite sketchy and like
Hmm.
some of these people are actually kind of in the United States right now being stuck in a position of statelessness because their adoption was never fully finalized in the United States, and so they don't have like full citizenship, and they don't realize that until they do something like they go to get married or something, and then find out they're having a problem. But then when they go back to Korea to try to get the original documents, it's like the agency was like this kind of fly-by-night situation.
Hmm.
And the only reason that was possible in the first place was because of the financial position that Korea was in after the 60s, right? After the Korean War. So, over and over and over again in Korean history, particularly I would say Korean history from the last like 500 years, are these giant, really painful global events that lead to kind of a fracturing of our culture. And so I I think that like to be Korean now is to be very innately aware of that history in a way that I think maybe a lot of Americans aren't necessarily aware of their own history because it has such a direct and deep impact on the the lives that modern Koreans lead, particularly abroad. So I think that was part of it. Also, like when I was researching this book, I was thinking a lot about fairy tales and particularly how they change over time. Like a lot of people don't know this, but the Grimm brothers were initially not trying to write for children. They were trying to do like anthropological research and collect like folk tales from different areas for adults, and then they weren't really like able to sell them. But one of the things they did was they should go. So they made them a lot of times more violent, less sexual. They changed like step parents into or parents into step parents. So like things that felt incestuous would not feel incestuous anymore. They really changed the nature of those fairy tales. And then eventually someone convinced them to try to sell them for children and they like took off, right? So I think a lot about that and about how these things that we consider like almost like a part of our historical cultural identity have been very much shaped by like a few actors, right?
Hmm.
Side and from the Western side.
Okay, so your microphone's cutting in and out again, but that's okay. So just to wrap it up, so the book just came out recently, and again, we're talking to Maria Dong about her book Aviary. What have the reactions been? I mean, I imagine you probably get a very wide spectrum of because it covers so many genres. I mean, imagine the reactions from all those different camps.
So a lot of like the very early interest really came from the horror space. I think originally the publisher was trying to position it more in the like the mystery space, the thriller
Hmm.
space. But we actually like had a surprising like uptake by horror influencers who were really excited about the book. And so I think, there were a lot of conversations about where does it go on the shelf? What is
Hmm.
how can we put it on its strongest foot? Because it really is a blend of the two. And yeah, so I think it's funny because if you've tracked the marketing, it kind of goes back and forth, right? Like for a while we were pitching more thriller, and then we kind of went more horror, and then thriller people started picking it up again. So now it's gone a little thriller. It's finding surprising footing among like literary fiction people. I mean the writing is kind of fancy in places, and so but and there are a lot of themes, literary fiction has
Hmm.
themes. So yeah, I think it's gotten reception from a lot of different places and it's been really exciting. I mean, it's a small publisher and to have as many influencers, take pictures with it and talk about it and review it as have has been really exciting because, they don't have like the crazy budget that like, Penguin Random House would have or
Sure,
something. So it's
sure.
been pretty fun.
Okay, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier. So, what's next for you? You said you already have your next one done, but it also sounds like you have like several already completed as well, just lined up and ready for publishing.
Yeah, that was the joke for a while because I tend to be on submission a long time, right? So, um, like for a while we weren't selling a book, but I was writing books and I kind of like got a big stack up. And then I had a baby and I didn't write anything for like 2 years, but we still had books to like send in the pipeline and sell. So we just sold the last, well, maybe the second to last unsold book. So that is tentatively titled Pastiche, and believe it or not, it's a genre mashup. So shocking. Which it's kind of like a heist novel with like a little bit of like Shakespearean comedy, fantasy, steampunk, Victorian suffrage kind of book. Yeah. And surprisingly, someone's impersonating their dead relative because apparently that's like my jam. Yes. And then also we were out on submission with another book, which is kind of like Charmed, if Charmed was like a bunch of Korean aunties. So,
Okay.
yeah, that one has not sold yet, but we just went out on submission. We're already getting some calls about that, so that's pretty exciting for me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this was fascinating stuff, Maria. And again, her book is Aviary, and you can get it at sort of booksellers. And Maria, if people want to find out, excuse me, a little bit more about you, where can they find you online? Website and or social media platforms?
Yeah, so my website's mariadong.com, and all of the links to my social are on there. Um, I, I also have an Instagram with Maria underscore Dong not exist. I'm on TikTok at Maria Dong Writes, and I'm on Blue Ski at I think it's Maria Dong Writes dot Ski dot
Okay. So the sound cut out again,
social
but
Blue
if
Sky, sorry.
oh, that's okay. That's okay. But
Um,
the sound cut out again, but
yes,
again is
so I'm
Maria
in all those
underscore
places.
Dong
That was
underscore
probably the most
writes on
reliable
both of
way.
those.
I think
Okay. That's
uh,
per
no underscores on TikTok.
No underscores on TikTok, but it is on the other two. And yeah, so, but we will put the website, mariadong.com, on both the Spotify and the YouTube listing when this posts. Maria, thank you so much for being here today. This was a great discussion.
Thank you. It was very nice to be here. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. And viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show and appreciate it as well, please hit like. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. I want to let you know theme music for our audio version is by Mark Gunyon. For my social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z. That's at maximumz.blog. For Blue Sky, the show is at podcast CWL, and my Blue Sky and Instagram are both at Pez Screenwriting, and you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books. Those are the ones on Amazon. Like I said, that's Maria. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.